Hi, Michael. We are so excited to have you on our show today to share your immense knowledge on a topic that often gets overlooked when it comes to health, but it really can play such a big role in helping people achieve a better quality of life and understand what's causing a lot of their unwanted health symptoms. And we're talking about air quality and specifically mold and mold remediation. And I'm personally in the midst of a mold issue in our home, as I shared before we started recording today. So unfortunately, I'm very interested in this topic. And thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. And yes, I mean, hopefully, as we get through this, more and more people should be interested in this topic.
Yes, yes. So before we dive in, one question we love to ask our guests is, what is one of your non-negotiables to start each day?
Um, every single day, I find something to do around the house that keeps me active. And so today's latest project, I planted some new flowers in the front of our house, and kind of re-looking at, updating the landscaping and modernizing it. But it's the non-negotiable is I got to do something active to keep the body moving.
Hmm. I
That's
love that. And a
great.
lot of people will say movement, but I love that you planted flowers. Like, so you did this beautification, you were outside planting flowers and active. That's great.
Yeah, for me, for some reason, like if I go on a treadmill, I feel like I'm going nowhere, and it's just this weird, it's this weird thing,
Yeah.
and so I'm like, I've just been like just doing things outside, doing yard work, doing housework. My wife is very happy with me, as you could imagine, but
I can, yeah.
also I feel better. I wake up sore, and it's like it's just a good thing, and I could see the change in putting in the work, and that's so just so rewarding for me.
And you're accomplishing stuff, which is amazing. So, Michael, everyone has a story, and we would love to hear how you ended up in this space and ultimately becoming known as the go-to mold remediator. And I know you've helped celebrities like Gwyneth Paltrow and other celebrities. Can you talk a little bit about your story and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, I mean, it really goes back to right when I'm 5 years old. My dad starts a company called JMC Contracting Corporation, and his whole company was focused around fire restoration and helping people restore buildings after major tragedy events. And when I got out of college and moved back home with to live with my parents and look at the family business and try to modernize it with some of the new marketing things I learned back in college, I quickly took an interest in noticing that Hurricane Sandy happens right before that. I start going to people's houses, working for my dad's company, and the amount of complaints of health issues that I received was staggering to me. And it made me realize, at the time, honestly, I was more interested in design, and I was going to go in a totally different direction. But when I started seeing this, the amount of people in the Northeast getting sick inside their own homes, it's the first time that I ever realized as a human being that our homes can impact our health, and the quality of air that we're breathing is so important that I know today. After that, it really led down this path of trial and error, trying to understand what happens when homes are damaged, what sort of mold or bacteria starts to develop out of that. It's 2013. I hear the word mycotoxins for the first time ever. I'm trying to dive through and understand what is a mycotoxin first off, and then how does it actually show up inside of a home, and how does it impact the human body, right? And so I started researching all these different doctors. Dr. Sprouse up in New York at the time was one of the first doctors I started looking at, and then I found Krista and Carnahan and some people that were trying to really revolutionize the fact that mold in particular can cause all these different health issues or certainly exacerbate them, right? And so it led into this whole journey of how can I help with the background and construction growing up around it. How can I make people's lives better? And it's one of those things where when you do a good job, the word of mouth spreads pretty quickly. Over the past 12 years, I've been fortunate enough to be contacted by several celebrities, have gone to some amazing homes, as you can imagine, to find problems, fix problems. And again, it's the background of construction has been so helpful because, first off, mold remediation in general is not being done properly. And I think that's one thing. But the other thing is we have to understand what allowed the building to get sick in the first place. And mainly they're going to be construction defects or failure to maintain the building properly. And having that background and being able to know those things and appropriately create a plan to fix those things, it makes this so successful. I don't want to drag this on too long, but going back to when I first started getting into this and seeing people getting sick, a lot of these homes were already remediated by these big, multi-billion-dollar companies, but yet they still felt sick. Yet I would see lab results of this wall that looked perfectly fine, was freshly painted, it was supposedly repaired. And there were staggering numbers of either mold or bacteria or toxins in the vicinity of that. And opening up that wall, right, and seeing all of this black carpeting of fungus behind it was
gross.
remarkable, right? And so I quickly realized, all right, well, we're not doing things. We're obviously not remediating properly. We're not restoring homes properly. We're essentially putting lipstick on a pig. And the result of that is people getting sick. And so, if you would have asked me 12 years ago, do I think I would have, been a mold remediator? I would have told you, no, you're crazy. But you asked me today, and I'll tell you, I don't think there's anything else I'd rather be doing because of the necessity of it. And how it relates to people's health, I think is quite remarkable.
Wow. Do you think how homes can be mold free? Like, is there such a thing, or is there a problem in every single home?
So I think we have to be careful with the word mold free. I think we want, can homes have a normal ecology, like a normal amount of mold?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
The only way to be mold free is to essentially build bubbles around our houses and
that's
live
what
like
I'm
the movie
saying.
Bubble Boy.
Like, it seems like unrealistic. It seems like every house has its problems.
But I'll tell you this. I mean, the way in which we're going down this trajectory, I mean, if you look at the American Healthy Home Survey 1 and 2 done by the EPA and HUD as a joint study, for those that may not know, it was done in 2006 and then also again in 2019, right? So we have a 13-year span. 35 of the 36 molds that they tested for across those 13 years went up in prevalence, meaning it is becoming more common in homes over the span of 13 years. That's not good, right? And so we obviously know that we have a pretty big problem here. It's obviously a problem between how we remediate the homes. It's obviously how we maintain the homes, how we restore them, and certainly how we build them. I mean, I can tell you horror stories of brand new homes. I mean, some of the most magnificent properties that were done by luxury builders were spent millions of dollars on that had extraordinary levels of mold in it because they're just not building them properly. To make matters worse, if we look at American history, Richard Nixon's presidents, 1970s, we're dealing with a global energy crisis. What do? We say, well, we need to become energy efficient. And so over the past 50 plus years, we're building tighter and tighter homes, more efficient homes. We're worried about heat and cooling loss, and that's all fine. But what we didn't think about? Just human beings living inside these petri dishes. Because let me tell you, I mean, the body is going to produce bacteria. We're going to exude virus particles. We're going to spray chemicals. We're going to be breathing and recycling that in. Having a energy efficient home with no air exchange, it's kind of like living in a car. And you know how you have that AC button, that little arrow that kind of loops back?
Yeah.
And you recycle the air inside. Well, that means that you're essentially recycling the air. You're not bringing fresh air in. Now you do that so it gets colder faster, but you want to turn that off eventually because you're just living with everything that you have in a very confined space. And so how does that impact the person? Well, it doesn't take a rocket science to figure out that we're now breathing in more particles with every breath 20,000 times per day because we have less air exchange. And so if you look at all of this together, it's a mind-blowing puzzle here. But let's look at how this correlates to our health. Well, the global population is declining in health. I mean, 60% of the global population deals with at least one chronic condition. 78% of US adults are on one prescription medication. How is this possible with advancements in medicine and technology? Well, it's only possible if said advancements are not in the direction of what the real culprit is. And I believe that as we see all these studies come out about the quality of air and how that's impacting cancer rates and all these things, I think that's a direction we need to be looking more closely at.
Yeah, well, there is so much to unpack here. It's like it could be like a multi-part conversation that we need to have with you. And, we had Brian Carr on, as we mentioned, who is one of the co-founders at We Inspect, and we talked about mold. That episode dropped, I think, early in 2024. But we don't want to kind of go down that same path in conversation. But for those of people who are not that familiar with this topic, and you mentioned mycotoxins, and can you just kind of give like a high level, like what are mycotoxins? Why should we be concerned about them? How they can show up in our homes? Just high level before we dive in and talk more about air quality and remediation.
All right. So what is mold? Mold is many different things. And I think that's why there's a lot of confusion around it. It is a living organism that reproduces. It's also commonly referred to as the spore itself, which is essentially the way it reproduces, kind of like how a weed might produce seeds, right? These seeds are referred to as mold, but also the living organism, or the plant, if you will, is also referred to as mold, which makes things very confusing. Now, you have the organism and the byproducts. That's how we want to kind of look at it. The organism can also produce what's called a mycotoxin, which is a toxin. It is a secondary metabolite produced by mold as a self-defense mechanism. So, what makes it produce mycotoxins? Well, I don't think we understand that fully, but a really good theory that makes a lot of sense is when you have water damage in your home, for example, you've got a little bit of a real estate there, and you have different species of mold. So again, a little confusing, but there are over 100,000 different species of mold that we know of. And we typically only look at about 36 of them inside the home. Now, these 36 species are essentially fighting each other, competing for that real estate, which is that water damage. Like most organisms on this planet, needs water to survive. And so they're producing mycotoxins essentially to kill each other off to gain more real estate. And we are essentially innocent bystanders of the chemical warfare happening behind our walls. And that's essentially what mycotoxins are. And what sort of human health risk do we have with mycotoxins? Well, I'll put it this way. We know that mycotoxins are harmful. We know that some of them can be carcinogenic and cancer causing. So much so that the FDA limits mycotoxins in our food supply. But there is absolutely no limitations whatsoever or regulations or even guidance around the quality of air that we're breathing and mycotoxins in our air, which is actually really interesting because if you pretty much look up any infectious disease, they'll tell you air transmission is the greatest route of exposure. And you certainly could inhale a lot more mycotoxins than you typically would be exposed to in the food supply. So I think we've really got to, get this under wraps and have a stronger discussion around the quality of air we're breathing and what are some of the dangers that impact that quality of air. And mycotoxins are definitely something to be concerned with.
So interesting. And it just makes me think like, how could you monitor the air in the world? Like that would be really difficult to do, don't you think?
Well, it would, you need
Like,
technology.
That seems so
within your home.
overwhelming.
Like, how do you monitor it within your home? I mean,
well, I have an air filter. We had a different guest on and she recommended, I can't remember which one I have, but I do have HEPA air filters, like freestanding ones on like in every room that we spend a lot of time in. Do you think that's a good idea?
I think it's a great idea, but could I blow your mind for a minute?
Yeah.
HEPA was introduced. HEPA is a standard that was introduced in the 1940s.
Okay.
We're 2024 and we're like looking at HEPA as the gold standard. And this is something that's literally 80 years old. I mean, look how far technology is advanced, right? And on pretty much everything else. Where is the big money in advancing technology in air filtration? It doesn't exist. It should, though, because look how much it could help people live healthier, happier lives, right?
We'll have to tell our kids.
So, somebody's
New
got
business.
to start inventing these things, right? I mean, look, there are companies out there trying to revolutionize filtration. It's too far and few between. But the sad reality is, like, we're still operating on this gold standard that was created 80 years ago, and we still tout this. And honestly, because nobody knows any better, because we don't really think about air quality as a civilization, it just continues to exist that way, right? So we actually all should be demanding better than HEPA, and it's with the technology that we have today at our fingertips, it should be achievable. As a matter of fact, there are some devices that do achieve much better than HEPA.
Okay, can you share what those are? Because we, as part of our mold rabbit hole, we did get an in-house HEPA air filter installed. So now that may or may not be helpful. It sounds like.
Well, it may or may not. It depends on the technology. The goal is, let me tell you the goal. The goal is you want a device, you want a filter, and a device is going to house a filter that is going to remove the smallest particle possible at the highest efficiency possible. So I'll give you an example. HEPA means it gets down to 3 microns at least 95% efficiency, or 99, something around those lines, right? So that means 99% of the time it's removing a particle at 3 microns in particle size. That's great. Mold can be 2 to 4 microns. This is the spore itself. So at 3, we're missing some mold, right? That means mold is bypassing this filter. Now, what else is smaller than that? Well, bacteria is smaller than that. So we're missing bacteria. It's bypassing the filter. Viruses are smaller than bacteria. It's passing that filter. Toxins are somewhere around the size of bacteria as well. So we're bypassing this filter. What are we getting? We're getting some mold. We're getting dust. We're getting dander, allergens, etc. This is good, but we actually have technology in some machines that can get down to nanometers in particle size, which means we're now talking the realm of viruses, which means we're talking toxins, which means we're talking bacteria. Viruses being one of the smallest things you would aim to achieve. And so with all of that being said, if that is the goal, then everyone listening to this right now needs to be educated on, how do I search for the best product? Well, you search for the product in your budget that can remove the smallest particle possible at the highest efficiency possible. So if it can get 7 nanometers in particle size, but only 50% of the time, okay, but 50% of the time it's passing through, right? So efficiency is just as important.
So what is the gold standard? As of right now, it doesn't sound like anything exists that's ideal, but
well, I could tell you this. Okay. I like the Healthway Super V system for HVAC, and it gets down to about 7 nanometers in particle size at about a 90. What? Healthway Super V.
Super V.
And that gets installed on the HVAC system. So you have to have a central HVAC system. And what ends up happening is it protects the HVAC system, right? Because when we're talking about mold, I'll tell you, a number one problem inside of a home is going to be the HVAC system. It is vulnerable. Honestly, so many IEPs, inspectors, mold experts out there, they have never understood that mold can grow in the HVAC system. And the only reason that we actually came to that determination is through testing and seeing different test results of HVAC systems inside of moldy homes, non-moldy homes, et cetera. And what we learned was, although it's metal and non-porous, so much dust and gunk gets built up inside of an evaporator coil over time that mold just starts to grow in the dust and feed off of the dust. And there's an endless supply of dust because most of us don't have good filtration devices on our HVAC systems. And what does that do? It essentially turns our HVAC systems into a mold and bacteria factory that puts that crap all over our house. I mean, if you look around right now, you'll see some vents that are supplying air to the room that you're in. Yeah. And so how do we not know this? How do I go to thousands of homes and see contaminated HVAC systems, all of which, you know what they tell me every time? Michael, I don't know how this is possible. You know, I have so-and-so that comes here every 3 months and deals with my HVAC system. They said nothing to me because they don't know what they're looking for. Do you think HVAC guys are educated on mold? They have no idea.
No.
Half of them don't even know what it looks like. They just think it's dirt.
So how do you know if your HVAC system is contaminated?
The best
what
way
if you're not having symptoms?
The best way to know is a test. If you're not having symptoms, you typically aren't trying to fix a wheel when it's not broken, right? So when someone's not having symptoms, they're not looking into air quality. I mean, honestly, even if you are having symptoms, when's the last time you thought about air quality? I'll tell you when you were sitting on a couch and it was a sunny day, that ray of light peeked through that window and started refracting off all the dust, right? And you thought, oh my God, my house is so dusty. Well, I hate to break it to you, but all of our houses are so dusty, and it's okay. It's normal. It's why we clean our houses. We remove the dust. But what's in that dust is very interesting, because if I have mold in my HVAC unit, if I have mold behind a wall, it's constantly reproducing. So I'm going to get spores. I'm going to get toxins. Those are going to aerosolize. They're going to latch onto the dust, become part of the dust, and then evenly distribute throughout the home. But then every time my HVAC system turns on, every time I walk across the floor, anytime I open a door or a window, just that volume of pressure that I can create by walking across the room kicks that dust back up, and it enters my breathing zone. Well, guess what I do? I walk across my house all day long.
Yeah.
And so I'm constantly kicking up dust and breathing it in as I walk across the floor. My HVAC system's on 24/7. I live in Florida. I have to have AC pretty much to survive here.
Yeah.
But guess what? That's constantly kicking up dust. So, our bodies are essentially, or our lungs are essentially our body's air filter, right? Well, why is this so problematic then? You hear people say to me all the time, Mike, the thing is, mold's been around forever, right? Why is this such a problem now? Well, again, going back to the house and how we've changed the way we build houses and made them tighter, I'm inhaling more particles than ever before, right? So that's part of it. But also, people don't realize that the greatest human health risk is anything smaller than 10 microns. Why is that? Because it bypasses our self-defense mechanisms, right? It's so small, it literally goes from, bypasses our mucous membranes, it gets into our lungs, passes through our lungs, and enters our bloodstream. And, if you go on the American Lung Association's website, they have a really good way of describing this whole process. And that's what we really need to focus on. So if we're not concerned about mold. Why are we not concerned about mold? Because we just lived through 20 years of being told you throw bleach on it or paint over it, right? So we're not concerned about it. Our buildings are changing, becoming more and more tight. Our homes have more and more HVAC systems because we're trying to be more and more comfortable. So we've got more points of vulnerability. All of this stuff starts accumulating on our dust because our homes are tighter. We're breathing in more dust, not less dust. And we have a recipe for disaster. So, what do we do about it? Well, best thing to do to start, just test the dust, right? We understand everything ends up in our dust. Testing our dust is the best way to screen our houses.
And I've done that now twice. And we're in the process of having someone come out next week, actually, to actually test for mold, because, what I've found, and these air tests don't always and very often don't detect that there's a mold issue. And it's interesting that you mentioned the HVAC system, because that's what I've been learning as well, that's where often the mold is. It's not like the small leak that you had in your bathroom when your shower or bathtub overflowed. That could be causing mold, but it very often is in your HVAC system. And so doing that dust test and getting the results, and then you have someone come out and you have to test. And then where you come in, as I understand it, is the remediation. And that seems to be, where you have had so much success compared to a lot of people who claim to remediate mold, but then these, like you said, these symptoms still continue to linger and it's not getting fixed at the source. So can you talk a little bit about that and like what specifically you're doing that gets to the root and the source? And then we can dovetail back into air and what you can do. Like once you know your home is mold free, if that's even a thing, like we talked about in the beginning, how you can create an environment that you're breathing in healthy air.
Yeah. So the goal is we want our home to be optimal, not mold free, not bacteria free. That if you try to go that route, you will probably drive yourself crazy because it's not sustainable. Okay. But you want your home optimal. And when I say home optimal, if I were to test my dust, it would mean that every single mold is in normal ranges.
Right.
And that's the goal. Right. And there's 4 steps to get there. And I'm going to break down said steps really simply. I call step 0. It is optional. I love this step, and I'll tell you why. Because if I'm starting off in this journey, this is what would make sense to me to start off on. And it is a hybrid of testing your house and testing your body. And what you are doing specifically is screening for mycotoxins or other biomarkers that lets you look at mold or waterborne bacteria, such as like actinobacteria. And I would also test my house, testing the dust. I'm going to explain why not air testing in a second. And through that, I will correlate directly how this is impacting my health. Now, I'll give you an example. Let's say I have high levels of ochratoxin A inside my body, and I have high levels of aspergillus inside my home. Pretty easy to say, well, I'm definitely getting exposed at home. Maybe I'm getting exposed in other places too, but I want to control the controllables. Let's reduce the exposure at home where I'm spending 90% of my time. And I will retest later and see how that impacts. And 99% of the time, you see the correlation right at home. Someone addresses the correlation. They address both the home and the body. You could see the results in the body. And typically they also talk about how they feel better. In the case of Gwyneth Paltrow, she says, I just turned 50. I was feeling beyond sick, beyond sluggish, and now I feel like I'm in my 20s again, right? So it hits people differently because people experience these things differently. But at the same time, you are seeing a direct benefit, right, from improving the quality of air they're breathing. So I'll stop there because it sounded like you had a question.
So yeah, I'm curious, when you test, I've never tested myself for mycotoxins, but let's say you do and you have them. Could it be that they're there from years earlier, or is it only showing up that you're getting, in the present moment, you're getting those toxins, or could they build up in your body over time? I guess, like, could it be from when you were 5 years old and you were living in a house that had issues or whatever?
Yeah. So I'm not a doctor, so I don't want to pretend to be here, but from my understanding is that when people don't methylate properly or detox properly, this exposure could be from years ago.
Okay.
And they may need to go on a program to help detox to get the levels lower. But however, just because you've been exposed years ago doesn't mean you also aren't being exposed now.
Right. It's hard to figure it out, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
It's hard to figure it out. And so one of the things I could tell you is I have not seen people have success where they just tried to detox living in a moldy environment. I'll tell you why. It's going to make sense in a minute.
Can I give you a personal example? So I've ran this mycotoxin report I actually ran it on a client years ago. And then when we identified that we had an issue through the dust test, I ran it on myself. I've done it myself twice, my husband and my daughter. And it's interesting because the We Inspect team, they wanted to see the results of this report. They also have the dust test. So to your point example earlier, they may be able to put some correlation together between the type of mold or the type of mycotoxins they found through the test in our body and the mold anyway. And I've done it twice on myself. And in between, I did do a protocol. And one of the types of mold went away. And the other one, and I can't remember the names offhand, the other one was reduced slightly, but still at a very high elevated level, which leads me to believe, and that was over a year period. And I did a 4-month protocol with taking different supplements every single day. leads me to believe that the mold is still in my home. And it was also interesting because my husband, my daughter, and I think we each had one mold in common, but we each had 3 different molds. So I guess to your point, I think you need this hybrid approach of testing your home. And if you just do a detox protocol without removing the source, it's not going to go away and it can only come back. So you're going to spend a lot of money, just keep doing protocols to hopefully reduce the symptoms.
I've got a good analogy too for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you have an overflowing bathtub, are you going to start putting towels down before shutting off the water?
Right.
No, right? You would shut off the water first. You have to stop the source creating the particles that are getting into the body before you try to remove the particles from the body. Otherwise, it's like, it's like having an overflowing bathtub.
Yeah, it's a waste of time and money. And that's why we're just doing this now. I'm like, we have to get to the source because twice in the last year, I've gone on vacation. It happens to have been out of the country for a week or more. And my one main symptom that I experienced was pretty much non-existent or very minimal. So it's like, it has to be my house, right? I mean, I don't know. So anyway, you can go ahead with step 1, but
yeah, it's such a good way. A lot of people, they finally have that aha moment when they go away and they like feel amazing. And then they come back and they're like, I don't feel well. Right. And so I think that's another good way to tea. But if you follow step 0, it's a little more scientific. So you can try to go that direction. We have step 1 is going to be then we understand, okay, there's some correlation between the house and the body. And I know the way I feel. I don't feel the way I should. So I'm going to move on to step 1. I'm ready to take that next step. Now, step 1 is easier said than done. Now, you happen to personally find a great company. I've been doing this for about 12 years. I can count on one hand how many great companies I've ever met. And so this is where the challenge kind of lies in. But hopefully, as I explain this step, it'll arm you with a little bit better ways to ask questions to identify this great company. Now, what the goal is you want to find the sources that are creating the particles that are elevated from step 0. So if I have high levels of ochratoxin A in my body and I have high levels of aspergillus in my home, good. I want to know where are the sources of aspergillus contributing to the particles that are found in my dust. Very simple step. The problem is that you need to use a range of tools to actually do this properly. So you need to use thermal imaging cameras. You need to understand where are the water sources potentially getting in. You need to survey the property on the outside, looking for weak points of water intrusion, survey on the inside. A lot of people think that if I have mold in my home, it means that I have black showing up on my walls or there's mushrooms or things of that nature. Every home I've been to over the past 12 years, very few of them had massively, abundantly visible signs of mold. So all of these things were hidden in HVACs, hidden behind walls, hidden behind ceilings. And I'll tell you, I look for the most subtle signs. You wouldn't believe it. I'm talking like a little bit of rust on a nail will give me the clue that I need to open this entire wall up. And that's exactly what we're looking for. Very slight, subtle signs. And then we take those slight, subtle signs and we test the area to validate. Now, why do we test? Because we want to understand, is this where the aspergillus is coming from? Did I just stumble upon another problem that's brewing? How big is the problem? Do I need to just cut out a little bit of the wall? Do I need to take the whole wall? All of this information becomes obvious when the results come back. Because unfortunately, and also fortunately, but not every single mold problem is created equally. I might have a very tiny problem that's not as big of a deal as that other room that is extremely toxic and producing particles and toxins like you wouldn't believe. And also, we want to take into consideration what sort of impact does this have in totality, right? Because I might have a 5,000 square foot home. I might need to take into consideration how one room or one HVAC system is impacting the entirety of the home, because many of us don't have money trees in our backyard. So we're not looking to address every single problem. We're looking to address the major problems contributing to the quality of air that we're breathing. And that cannot be done if you do not have testing done to show you what levels of what species in what locations. So that's how we kind of take that process a step forward into step 3. Step 3 is the remediation phase. Now, I'll tell you one thing I've learned. Remediation is not just cutting out drywall and removing insulation and putting new drywall and insulation back and painting it the same color that the wall was previously. Although, if you call about 50,000 companies out there, that's likely what you'll get.
That's what we did.
That's what you did. And the reason being is because all of these companies primarily existed to service insurance companies. I buy a house, I get it insured, I have a problem, I call my insurance company, they call one of these companies, they get them out there. Well, the insurance company, their entire goal is to mitigate costs. And so in these mitigation of costs, they work with these companies and they try to, I will refer you business if you, be honest and do as minimal work as needed to restore the place to make it look like it never happened. I mean, there's some slogans out there like it never happened. It should be look like it never happened, because the entire industry, there are some people out there now over the past decade that are doing the right thing. But the majority of the industry back when I started, they were not looking into the science behind what they were actually there to do. And again, this is born out of an entire period where we said it's no big deal. You pour bleach on it and paint over it. Now we know it's a big deal, right? So we have to kind of reverse the development of this entire industry, which, by the way, is not easy to do. So step 3.
Can I ask you a quick question about that before you go on?
Yeah. Yes.
Why wouldn't bleach be okay? Because doesn't bleach kill bacteria and mold and stuff?
Bleach has been discovered that it is not effective at killing mold. Number one.
Okay.
The other discovery was that actually the goal isn't to kill mold at all; it's to remove it. And so, if you actually go, do me a favor, when we hang this up later, I want you to Google the words EPA space bleach, and you'll have a whole article on this about. And this is if you went on the EPA's website like 2 years ago, they would tell you bleach is great. So everyone's starting to learn that chemicals and bleach, it's not effective. The goal needs to be removal. And I will promise I will get there in my story.
Okay.
In this step 3, going back to me discovering this problem in the first place, people would come in, cut out drywall insulation, put it back, paint it, problem solved, right? Now, what did I tell you earlier? Mold is both the organism, it's also the byproducts the organisms produced. You just think about these companies that come in. When are they asking you, hey, we need to check the HVAC system to see if mold got in the HVAC from this basement leak? Never. When did they say, hey, we need to clean your entire house and everything in it? Never. They just come in and cut the wall out and leave. That's it. They're there in and out, 2-3 hours. They set up machines. Honestly, most of their business model is set up to just bill the insurance company for the machines. And they do very minimal labor and just hit them with machine bills. This is not an effective strategy. It is not scientific. And certainly it allows people to still feel the effects of the mold long after the quote unquote remediation is complete. And this is the main discovery that I discovered back, in 2012, 2013, that I started to build a foundation for how do we create new processes out of. And what we want step 3 to be is not just the antiquated mold remediation process. It is, how do we remove the organisms that are creating the most amount of particles safely and effectively? How do we clean the entire environment thereafter to remove the particles and toxins that have been created this entire time? How do we make sure the HVAC system wasn't contaminated in the first place? If it was, how do we decontaminate that so that it is no longer a mold or bacteria factory? Then how do we make sure this problem never happens again? Yeah. And that is a big step. Even if you do all the other steps right, if you don't do that step, you're right back to square one. And that's, we have to look at the totality of the environment. what's my building pressure like? Is my building under negative pressure? Because if my building's under negative pressure, do you know what I'm doing? I'm pulling particles in from outside, which includes mold, which includes bacteria, allergens, anything you don't want. It also includes pulling moisture in from outside. I have a 15,000 square foot house project I've been working on for about a year now. And it's been this long because there's been so many building defects that need to be fixed. And that house was under such negative pressure in the north, mid northwest area. They're just pulling in moisture, pulling in cold air. The entire house was sweating. Horrible, right? These brand new homes with that don't have proper pressurization. We have to look at the pressurization. We have to look at the filtration of your HVAC system, of the rooms inside the home where you spend the most time. And certainly we have to control things like humidity. And that means if you want to add humidity because you're in a drier climate, let's do it in a way where we're not making a problem. If we want to take away humidity because we're in a more tropical climate like me, let's do it in a way where it could be maintained very easily so that we don't create problems because, it's just too easy, too hard to maintain. And let's come up with total solutions so that you honestly can know that this house is fixed once and for all. You could feel the difference, which obviously that's the whole goal of what we're doing. And you're now set up to do things in a way where it's easy to maintain, and you've got some solutions to just double check things once a year to make sure everything's working as intended. And that is really how you do step 3. And it's taken me 12 years to get to this point. Every few years, I reevaluate or I add pieces to the puzzle. But it's the total solution is what's really required, not just opening up wall and removing some mold.
So overwhelming.
It's so overwhelming, but I
gosh.
do love and appreciate what you're doing in this process because it's very similar. Marnie and I are both health coaches and integrative health practitioners. And it's like any health issue or symptom, many of which may be due to mold in addition to other factors, right? But you need to address it at its source. You need to remove, say it's bacteria in your gut or whatever it is, right? And then have these processes and new habits, and maybe you're changing the way maybe you, for in this example with air, maybe you stop wearing your shoes in the house or whatever it is, right? You're making these habit and system changes to make sure it doesn't happen again. And then you're doing these checks on a regular basis. Like you said, maybe you're checking your HVAC system, no different than maybe you run another functional medicine lab test that we offer to make sure that that the excess bacteria went away. So it's just in line with how we look at health from a broader perspective. And the fact that mold and the excess mold and the mycotoxins and bacteria are having such a detrimental impact on people's health, and they don't understand that this could even be the source of their issues is just, I don't know, it's like mind blowing.
Well, and also I'm just thinking about the expense, thinking about all these steps and the fact that, we live in Minneapolis, right? I'm pretty certain there's not a Michael Rubino and your company in Minneapolis doing this kind of thing. So just finding knowledgeable people on this subject is so difficult. And then if you don't have the funds to go down this rabbit hole, it can be overwhelming.
Well, luckily for you, I did create a company that is nationwide. It took me about 5 years to become nationwide, but since 2022, we are nationwide.
Tell us about it.
Yeah. So, you have these big box chains and they typically are franchises. And so, they allow people to come in for $50,000 and own a, brand name in their local town. Wasn't going to work, right? You already said this is kind of complex. We make it really easy for you because we already did all the homework. We know all the steps. We know what to look for. So we can use our expertise to develop a plan. I can't train people. There's no way I'd be able to train new business owners all the time and do the franchise model. So what we did is we did the more corporate model where, we train our own people. We have a warehouse right outside of New York City. Inside, we have a house that we built inside of this warehouse that we use to actually train our people in our process. And we have strategic locations across the US that house equipment and materials, just warehousing. And we recently just sold off 7 vehicles, and we're going to sell off another 12. And we're switching to pods, where we basically ship, because it's going to be cheaper to be able to make it more cost effective for people, to put equipment and materials in pods and ship the pods to their driveway, and then fly in or drive in from wherever the nearest location would be to perform the work at that project. And when I first started back in the Northeast, it was no joke. You needed $100,000 to work with me, and I had a team of maybe 10 people. And it was, we only did these big projects, and we only did like everything or nothing. And to make a scalable company that helps people, that's focused on helping people, obviously one of the biggest challenges you have to overcome is the accessibility to it. And what we did was we said, well, if we open locations in parts of the US where we can get equipment and materials in and out cheaper and faster, then we can honestly start to hire people in different regions of the US. We could train them. They essentially work out of this location and travel within a certain radius to perform projects at people's homes. And we also have to understand that, the hard stance that I had in the beginning of my career is like, I only want to do everything or nothing. And that was mainly because I had a small crew, I was in demand, and I didn't want to work on a project that I didn't think I would be successful at. In learning and by trial and error and adapting and making this more widely accessible, I can tell you that the average person typically spends about $40,000 to improve the quality of air. Now, that is a 60% reduction in the average project cost over the span of about 5 years, which is not easy to do, by the way.
That's
the
amazing.
second thing is, 40,000 is not a small amount of money either. That doesn't mean that you need to spend 40,000. That's just the average of what people end up spending. We do projects for 5,000. We do projects for 20,000. We do projects for 100,000, a million, everything in between. There is no real minimum cost to do a project with us. However, we have a network of traveling logistics. So let's just say you're in Ohio and you're like, look, I've only got this bathroom. Everything else in my house is fine. We're talking, this is a $5,000 project. Can you come and do it? Absolutely. We're going to be passing through Ohio on May 7th, right? And at that time, we can do this if you can wait a week or so. Yes, absolutely, because I want it done right. I'm happy to do that. And that's how we've been able to even go, because normally 5,000 to travel to and get there would be impossible. But we've built our company in a way where it becomes a web. And as we are traveling through logistics, we're passing through certain areas, we want to make sure that we are being accessible to anyone and everyone, regardless of their budget. And again, the goal is based upon the science, looking at the data. How do we create a plan that will actually help them? If we don't think that the 5,000, if you have $100,000 worth of problems and you just want to do 5,000, we'll help you, but we're going to be very honest with you that we strongly do want you to know that this is not going to solve your problem. You still have bigger fish to fry here. But we've really put ourselves in a position to be able to help more and more people and become more and more affordable. And honestly, we still have plans to increase the accessibility, increase the affordability. I think it's just going to take time. We're kind of like where Tesla was, where, really expensive, and they started, making it more and more affordable. I mean, that's how you have to do it. And unfortunately, when you're trying to help as many people as we are, and some costs are out of your control.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that you're doing this. This is wonderful that you are going to be more accessible for people. And I know this is probably a loaded question and we are running out of time, but I'm just curious in a very succinct way, what does the remediation process look like? And more from the standpoint, do you have to move out? Does everyone that has mold that needs to be remediated in a home likely need to move out? Because that can be like scary and daunting. I mean, I've heard of people that start sleeping in their backyards, like in a tent. I've heard stories about this.
All right. Well, so just so people aren't in a mystery, the fourth step is prevention. So we don't want to skip
Oh,
that.
sorry,
So
I
people
kept.
don't, just so people don't hang up and be like, what was the
Okay.
fourth step? That was probably so important. No.
Yes.
The fourth step's prevention, right? So we come up with help with annual checkups and protocols to make sure we look at things and we keep it from getting as problematic as it
Right.
usually gets.
Yeah.
Now, do I need to move out? What's the process like? And do I need to sleep in a tent? So you should move out. And I'll tell you why you should move out. If I'm remediating a bathroom in your house and you live on the other side of the house, you're like, yeah, it's fine. It's a bathroom. Okay. Well, I'm going to tell you why you should still move out, because when I put that bathroom under negative pressure, I am pulling everything, all the air, even from interstitial cavities behind walls towards that bathroom. So if I've got issues in my attic, if I've got issues in my basement, or, maybe there's some things I don't even know about, I am increasing the amount of particles you're going to be breathing in, even if you're on the other side of the house. So I think from a safety and health perspective, it's not a good idea to live in your house while you're under remediation. That's the number one thing I say. Now, if you tell me I have nowhere to go, I have no options, obviously it'll be like, hey, look, go to the park for the day or something. You want to sleep there at night, no big deal. We'll turn off the equipment at night, so we're not moving around so much particulate, potentially pulling stuff in from other areas we might not even know about, right? So always we help where we can. But if you're asking what the ideal situation is, the ideal situation is you are out of the house in a way, for the project, because it's just the best thing for you. The process itself, you kind of got the sense a little bit. You need containments, you need engineering controls, you need to basically control the airflow, because when I swing a hammer, I could be releasing millions, tens of millions of spores into the air. I want to have that trapped in a filter, taken out of the window. Then I want that stuff going across the house, making it 10 times more difficult to remove the particles and toxins in that later step. So the project needs designed engineering controls. The project needs to be done properly and carefully with protection in place. I think that's a bit of an understanding. You are removing walls, removing insulation, potentially removing vanities, wherever there's mold trapped behind. You are cleaning that lumber. We don't use any toxic products. We use all botanical products. So we're then cleaning with botanical solutions as a degreaser to just remove and disinfect these particles and take them away, right? So that's kind of the process and the goal. And then we'll usually apply like an antimicrobial based paint to just protect the structure, prevent mold from growing back again in the same location. Just again, part of the preventative measure. And from there, everything gets tested to make sure that it's done before it's built back. Now, I think I'm pretty good at what I do, but you need to test my work. The reason being is because I could be good. Doesn't mean I have microscopic vision. It's very possible that I can miss something because I may think I got it all, but little did I know there's another stream of water that went down just a few more inches to the right that I didn't see because it's behind the wall and I don't have X-ray vision. Therefore, it's always a good idea to test, to verify before you build it back. And then the sleeping in a tent thing. I'm a strong believer in you do what you want to do.
Yeah.
Now, if you go in Facebook groups, it's you get a lot of crazy things people say.
Yeah, I think that's where I probably read it actually. Yeah.
I think that, there are people that have had amazing success sleeping in a tent. Why? Because, they've got a moldy place, they've got nowhere to go, they go camping in their backyard. I think that's fine. I had a woman who was, really, really sick, GJ feeding tube in her lower intestine, essentially giving her the nutrients to stay alive. Within 7 days of leaving the place, GJ feeding tube's gone. She was bedbound 95% of the time. She's now walking. Okay. She was literally holding her kids for the first time in 3 years, just a week after getting out of that house. But where did she go? Well, she rented a 250 square foot RV, put it on her property, and that's where she moved into while the work was being prepped. I mean, we knew the house was toxic. We told her get out as soon as the results came, but there were still weeks of work left to do to coordinate everything. So that was the best thing that she did. And it's an RV. It's close to a tent, a little more comfortable, but these are the things that people come up with to try to survive. And so, do I think it's necessary? No. If you have the means and resources to go elsewhere, absolutely. But if you've got nowhere to go, I mean, the tent certainly sounds better than staying in a toxic environment. And so I think the message needs to be, you got to do whatever you need to do, whatever makes sense for you. But there's also a stigma around, like, if you don't sleep in a tent for the next 2 years, you're not going to get healthy. And that's not entirely accurate either.
Can we change gears for a minute? And can I ask you a totally different question? I'm curious about ducts, getting them professionally cleaned. Let's say, some of our listeners are not having this, they don't know, they're living maybe with no knowledge if they have mold in their homes or not, but you're told that you should have your air ducts in your home professionally cleaned, and you should clean your air filters in your HVAC systems regularly. What are your thoughts on that? And who is the appropriate person to be doing that stuff?
Yeah. There's some nuance here. So a lot of us growing up might remember a company called Sears. I'm pretty sure they're no longer in business, but they did these like $20 air duct cleanings.
Yeah.
And I've experienced some of these cleanings before as a kid, and I remember they come in with like the $20 shop vac from Home Depot, and they, clean out the 2 foot that they could reach, and that was it. And it made people feel good, right? Like that's really what it was. Unfortunately, there are some companies that kind of adapted that model over the years and still do that. And that is really not an effective way to clean the ducts. One of the best certifications for duct cleaning that I have found is from the National Air Duct Cleaning Association. So if you go on NADCA.com right now and you type in your zip code, you could find a bunch of companies that are in your area that are certified. And the reason I like them is because they're really the only certifying body for air duct anything that has anything to do with mold, meaning they understand mold, they know how to remove it, they know how to set up proper engineering controls to protect the mold from escaping across the house. They do a good job. Now, with that being said, we also have to understand the averages of a HVAC system itself. One of these averages is very important. Ducts are not hermetically sealed, meaning they are not 100% sealed to each other. As a matter of fact, the average is about a 96 to 97% seal rate. So we have a 3 to 4% leakage ratio, meaning particles, as they're being cleaned, even with the best protections, will escape out into the environment. Now, knowing that, when we get to that cleaning phase, right, which is going to be the third step here, when we're removing the byproducts, we want to make sure we're actually cleaning the duct and the HVAC system first, shutting it off, cleaning the house second, and in that order. Because if I clean the house first, then the HVAC system, more than likely, I'm going to get more particles into the house. If I clean it the other way around, it's 10 times more efficient, because now I'm not having to worry about, did I get something in the environment, because you're kind of removing it in proper sequence. And so I know I have already overwhelmed many of you, and I'm sorry to do it again, but that's why it's so important that you find the right people that understand how to do things in proper sequence, because I think how they do the steps and the sequence of those steps is vitally important to you actually getting the outcome you're looking for, which is feeling better.
Wow. Well, thank you for all that. That's there's so much good information, and we will try to link all this up, especially these sites that you referenced in the show notes. So Michael, we are going to have to, start to wrap this conversation up, and you've shared so much. and so many suggestions, but we do love leaving our listeners with just some practical tips and suggestions for anyone, maybe really focused on air quality, because that's something that we all should be focused on, regardless of whether you have mold in the home or know that you do. Things that we can do on a daily or annual or semi-annual basis to reduce our exposure and improve the air quality.
I got two simple things for you. We purify our water. We should be purifying our air, removing as much contaminants as we can. I already taught you how to look for the best air purifier. I also want to bring another thing that's very simple, very easy to do. Nobody likes doing it, including me. But we have to clean our homes more frequently. If you caught anything that I said, everything becomes part of our dust. So the more we allow dust to accumulate in our environment, the more particles, toxins, et cetera, we're going to be breathing in. It's just how it works. So by being on top of cleaning, removing dust from our places, and this includes the hard to reach spots like on top of the kitchen counters, on top of the ceiling fans, on high to reach ledges. We might not have to do that every single week, but we want to do that like once a month. It's again, the strategy is to remove dust. If we just make dust public enemy number one today and start to develop better cleaning procedures using better products to clean with, something that has less chemicals, more botanicals, I think we're going to be in a much better spot than if we, kind of live in status quo. So if you do those two things, you'll notice a difference. Unfortunately, if your home is, it has other things happening that are toxic and contributing, you might not be able to clean fast enough. But, those are two things that I think if you haven't started there, start there.
What about opening windows?
Absolutely. So the solution to pollution is dilution, right? We open windows, we're getting fresh air in.
Yeah.
We are limiting, we are definitely going to be inhaling less particles with fresh air coming in and diluting the amount of particles present. So yes, I mean, if you're in a tight spot, you can't leave, you can't remediate for whatever reason that may be, open windows, get air purifiers, clean more frequently. Like these are things you can do right now to get at least a break.
Okay. That's super helpful. And like you said, simple, which is also good.
So,
Absolutely.
Michael, how can people get in touch with you, hire your business, find out more information?
All right. So if you go look for me on social media, my name is Michael Rubino. You should be able to find me pretty easily on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, etc. If you need a company like HomeCleanse to come and help you figure things out, especially if you feel overwhelmed right now and you're like, how do I just get started? We can help point you in the right direction. And that's homecleanse.com. One thing I didn't really touch on a lot today is changetheairfoundation.org. Part of trying to fix one house at a time that doesn't work is there are a lot of systemic issues that allow us to get here in the first place, like insurance is not covering homeowners properly, like landlords that don't have any mold coverage for any secondary property they own. I mean, I can go on and on. The point being is we're looking at changing by educating and creating awareness around this topic. We're also looking at changing policies that protect people because mold is not even considered a health hazard in any state in the U.S. We have 16 bills proposed in 16 different states right now to change just that.
Wow.
And last but not least, research. We need more research. And it's easy for me to come here and tell you we need more research. We need more research. Well, I'm putting my money where my mouth is and I'm helping to fund said research. And so a lot of really exciting things are coming out, especially the biggest and only economic impact study ever being done was paid for and sponsored by us and should become available to the public in June. So really excited on the nonprofit side of things that I'm doing as well, and hope if any of this resonated with you, you will check us out and support us.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know I'll be checking you out, but
yeah, me too.
Well, this has been a really a very educational episode and conversation that we're having with you, and love what you're doing from a research standpoint and just trying to implement policy. Because like you said, without that foundation, you're not going to be able to help everyone. One person or one company can't do it all. And it seems like healthy and clean air should be like a birthright. Like we shouldn't have to be fighting for that, but this is where we are. So anyway, Michael, one final question that we love to ask all of our guests is, what does the art of living well mean to you?
It means everything to me, because if we're not living well, then we're not really living at all. And I think anybody who's ever experienced illness in any way can understand and appreciate that deeply. I mean, living well really equates to our quality of life. And so the more we can do to have some security around living well, I think the more impactful our lives will be. And so hopefully I have provided people some perspective on what I see as a big missing link in the art of living well. And I hope that you are now empowered to go and do something about that.
Thank you so much. And I think we are.
Yes. I think everyone today listening absolutely is empowered. So,
and we can feel your passion. So,
yeah. Well, thank you so much, Michael. Thank you for your time today and all that you're doing. And I'm sure I will be in touch with you shortly.
Thank you so much for having me. And if you had as much fun as I did, then please invite me back. I would love to do it again.
Great.
Yeah, there's clearly a lot more to discuss.
Yeah.
And sometimes we just barely get to scratch the surface, but we've got really good information in this one.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.